Good morning. Welcome to the Premium Public Video Forecast discussion for Friday, September 13th, 2024. Yep, it is Friday the 13th. Feeling lucky? Well, if you're in the northern mid-Atlantic, you might actually feel lucky about this weather because today we're going to talk about Rex Block's rules. That's right. The Rex block is going to be locking in. I'm going to explain what that is. First, we're going to talk about the tropics. It's heated up a little bit. Now, we had Francine. It is now a post-tropical system, what we call extratropical. We're going to watch out for the remnant moisture here, possibly spawning a low-pressure system out here. Certainly weakness along the southeast coast. We'll talk about that more in a minute. We have Tropical Depression 7 out here. It's attempting to become a tropical storm. This storm, though, is not a threat for the eastern United States. Why? Because of this right here. Well, this is a trough out here in the central Atlantic. And along with this trough, this feature is running into quite a bit of dry air, vertical wind shear, basically unfavorable conditions. So, yeah, it could be named into a tropical storm. It was supposed to be already, but it's having a really difficult time of reaching that next level of intensification. It's been a tropical depression for about 48 hours, and it will gradually march its way to the west and eventually will start to turn to the north and get drawn into this whole trough complex, which is part of what we call a negative NAO pattern. So it's pretty much going to be left out away from us. The rest of the tropical Atlantic is as quiet as it possibly can be. Again, we're at the peak. Climatologically, we're at the peak of the hurricane season. This is when we're supposed to see, 4 or 5 waves. 3 of them become tropical depressions. 2 of them become tropical storms and hurricanes. We're not seeing anything like that at all. Okay. And part of my job of being a meteorologist is not telling you a bunch of hype, but telling you the truth. And the truth is, regardless of what you might hear, the idea of a hyperactive tropical season is basically dead. Dead, dead, dead. It's not happening. And if it was going to happen, hey, look, the clock is striking 12 at this point, okay? So that does not look like it is going to be a likelihood. However, as I always say, all you need is one hurricane to make a memorable season, especially depending on where you live. So we always have to keep an eye on the tropics and see what is evolving here. But the good news, I would say, is that at least in terms of any type of major hurricanes, I don't see any type of threat of that right now. No sign of any immediate development that is close to the East Coast. Now, we are going to talk about this little festering feature out here. All right. So just hold on tight for a minute. Taking a look at the model guidance here. Again, this is our tropical depression. As you can see, is turning north. A lot of this intensification that you see out here in the model guidance, this is via when this tropical low interacts with this trough. It's going to have the capability of basically transitioning into an extratropical storm. And I think that's when you see this bulk of intensification. Other than that, it's going to be running into a lot of shear. So any other forecast for intensification doesn't make much sense unless you have a transition. Out here, you have the tropical waves coming off the African coast. You could see a little bit of development, but as you can see, anything that does try to develop basically gets turned north as we just have unfavorable conditions out here in the MDR, so that certainly limits your potential of any type of development. Out here in the Caribbean, pretty quiet, nothing really showing up. And I mean, the Gulf of Mexico is as dead as it could possibly be. And this is a 10-day forecast. So this takes us right through the middle of September, which again is when you're supposed to have your climatological peak. So this is all great news. Obviously Louisiana has some bad flooding with Francine making landfall. Luckily, it was a hurricane that topped off at Category 2 strength, but it looked like based on the observations, it was weakening as coming in. But as always, it's not just the winds. It's also the storm surge and the heavy rainfall that can produce massive flooding, and that's always a concern. That's something that we are watching unfortunately. What's left of Francine is just going to meander in the Mississippi River Valley. But notice we have some activity here. Now, what's going on here? Well, let's dive into some of our observations and let's take a look at what's going on closer to home, okay? So right now we have high pressure sitting right over us. Winds are light and variable. Along the coast are coming in from the northeast around 5 miles per hour. With that transport of moisture coming in off the Atlantic Ocean, you have some low-level moisture supporting low clouds and some areas of fog. Not widespread, but more patchy than anything else. Get used to hearing that quite a bit over the next 7 days. Temperatures range from the upper 50s to lower 60s over the northern interior, a few mid 50s in some of our secluded valleys, and lower to mid 60s in our urban areas and in the suburbs. Down to it's already up to 70 around Wildwood. That's pretty impressive, but it's struggling at 58 out here towards eastern Long Island. So, as you can see, high pressure is keeping everything pretty quiet. And if you see activity on the radar, and that's more likely some birds and some insects or anything else. The best way to tell that is look at the observations and also look at your satellite pictures. Don't just look at the radar and say, oh, look, it's raining here and there. No, you have to look at a variety of different data, and the data tells us a lot. This is what we call ground clutter. This, though, is not. So let's zoom out here and take a look at what we're dealing with here. So this is our water vapor satellite picture. And you can see we have sinking air here. Now we know that because it's drying out. So you have, when you have air that's sinking, it's drying. So you have this substance developing here with our polar jet stream. This is what's left of Francine, and it is being absorbed by a trough in the subtropical jet stream, which is right around here. And as you're getting heights building with this ridge here, you're starting to have a counterbalance of below normal heights here. So remember, the atmosphere is always looking for balances in the horizontal and vertical, right? And it's constantly moving and changing. That's why we have weather. So while this is all evolving here, you're going to get this weakness here down around the southeast coast. This trough here remains to our west and stays that way for quite a bit of time until this starts to push east. We remain in this block with this upper level ridge dominating the northern tier and this upper level low and below normal heights dominating the southeast. So when we take a look at that in our upper level winds, well, what we're starting to develop is a Rex block. This high pressure ridge gradually shifts towards New England and the mid-Atlantic. This upper level low meanders over the southeast. And what they do is that they kind of play off each other, right? Because they're balancing each other. And the airflow is moving from the higher heights, that's why we call it high pressure, to the lower heights, i.e. low pressure. So the reason why that's happening is that the air is trying to fill the lower pressure, right? So in order to create a balance in the atmosphere. So what happens is that this pattern kind of gets stuck. And what you end up with is a lot of sinking heights here. But also you see this convergence and confluence that's sitting right over us right now that's producing that dry air that we saw in the water vapor satellite picture. That's going to shift towards the Gulf of Maine and enhance surface high pressure right about here. So you have high pressure setting up here. You have below normal heights of low pressure system here and troughs here. You have your subtropical jet stream here with some divergence and diffluence. Notice how the winds here kind of spread out here. That's called diffluence. So you're getting all this set up here. And so you get this weakness off the southeast coast. When you get a low pressure system kind of meandering and lingering out here, or even a trough, it interacts with the Gulf Stream that's right here with very warm waters, you can have a low pressure system pick up some tropical characteristics. And what that means is that the lower portion of the low pressure system from 925 millibars down to the surface picks up what we call warm core characteristics because the lifting is driven by the release of latent heat, right? And rising warm air at the core of this low pressure system, which leads to falling heights and lower pressures. But the upper levels is clearly driven by a cold core process, i.e. this trough, which is driven by thermodynamic processes. So you have two different processes of lifting occurring at the same time. And this is what we call a subtropical low pressure system. Now, if this happens to develop into a subtropical depression or a storm, that doesn't make the storm itself stronger. It's just we're just naming the different processes of lifting involved in the atmosphere. A lot of people believe like, oh, they named a storm, it must be getting stronger. No, we're naming the storm because of the processes of lifting that make it unique, but not necessarily strong. It makes the focus of where we're seeing the impacts different than what we have with an extratropical storm, which is more spread out. So again, I want to make that very clear that just because a storm is named does not necessarily make it stronger than, let's say, a nor'easter or something of that nature. It's just we're recognizing the different lifting processes involved in this system. So as you can see on the infrared satellite picture, we're pretty much protected. I mean, look at this. We'll take a look at some of the low clouds in a minute with the visible satellite picture, but you can see the influence of that sinking air and high pressure. It's basically protecting the entire region from what's left of the moisture of Francine, right? So this is not going any further north. Sorry, Virginia, you're going to be dealing with some cloud cover, but this, as it tries to push northward, basically runs into a roadblock here. So this area stays pretty much quiet with just a few scattered clouds. Then we have a lot of unsettled conditions down here in the southeast, and you can see some of the convection trying to pop up here, and basically a lot of unsettled conditions, but not really any type of organized low pressure system. On the visible satellite picture, you can see the upper levels. You can see the winds coming in from the north. You see some of the high cirrus clouds. The low level clouds are coming in from the east. So we have an easterly wind and northeasterly wind here. And so, much like yesterday, you get a lot of these low clouds and fog developing. And this factor, all right, in the morning with some low clouds and some areas of fog, is going to be continuing to be a theme for at least through the weekend and continuing into next week. And you can see what that looks like in the skew T. This is the vertical look of the atmosphere. And you can see at the surface here, you see that moisture transport, and you can see the moist atmosphere supporting those low level clouds. But once you get above 925 millibars, you have a ton of dry air. So basically what this tells me is that once we get the sun to rise and we get mixing going, those low clouds dissipate and we end up with a lot of clear skies. So this is why in the afternoon we get a lot of sunny conditions, but in the morning you get these low clouds and fog and just unsettled conditions. So let's understand the pattern that we're in right now with this blocking taking place. What we have is a pretty strong negative NAO for next several days. The Arctic oscillation in this forecast remains negative as well. The Eastern Pacific oscillation, though, is generally positive. Okay. So this tells me that, hey, look, this would most likely support a trough in the west. And that's essentially what we're seeing here with the PNA. You can see the transition of a breakdown of this pattern as the PNA goes more towards a positive state. So we start to get a ridge and that trough gets pushed out. So this tells us the overall theme. You never want to use this for a specific forecast, but you get the overall theme of the weather pattern. So when take a look at the ensemble guidance here, well, there's our Rex block. See, again, remember I said high pressure, low pressure, they're kind of playing off each other. This remains in place for the next several days. And unfortunately, with this type of setup, it sets this high pressure system locked in here. Here's our negative NAO signature that, is kind of a pseudo negative NAO, which you typically see during the early fall months and summer months, where it's not textbook that you would normally see, like when they look for it in the winter, but it basically provides the same scenario. And there is our trough in the west with our negative PNA. And here is the signal of basically our positive EPO pattern. So as we move forward, it's not that this deep trough shifts east, it's that it basically minors out and the whole pattern basically transitions to a little bit more relaxed. So we're not transitioning the whole pattern going from ridge to trough from in the east. We're pretty much just minoring out, weakening this pattern. So we don't see any gradual changes. There's no major storms. maybe a passing cold front or two. You get more of an influence from the Pacific. So this means that through the middle of September into the end of September, temperatures are going to average near to slightly above normal. No major storms, no major impacts. With this weakness over the eastern United States, this likely keeps any tropical systems away from our neck of the woods. Of course, around the Gulf of Mexico, you still have to keep an eye out, but I don't see any major weather events, at least synoptically, from this scenario setting up, which is great news for us, right? So over the next 90 hours, here's our ridge building, right? So we're quiet. Here's our weakness here along the southeast coast. And again, you'll get a low pressure system kind of festering around here, and we'll see whether or not it picks up any tropical characteristics. Don't buy into any hype, though. I know there's going to be some individuals that might put out a video like, if there's a name system, make a big deal about it. It's really not. It's really, really not. But the concern here is that with this setup, and you can see that here at 850 millibars, notice the winds at the mid levels, and next we'll show the lower levels coming in from the east. Why am I concerned about this? Well, we're moving towards astronomical high tide, okay? And with that being the case, you get a persistent easterly wind for over 7 days. That's going to build up your tides just on that alone. Then you look at the high tides for the astronomical high tide, which you normally see some minor coastal flooding. That's going to enhance that. So I've been saying that for the past couple of days, so that way you're prepared. This is why, okay? This whole pattern isn't going anywhere. And so you get this persistent easterly wind. It doesn't necessarily have to be strong. It just is persistent. So it's more difficult to drive that moisture out. Again, in terms of precipitation, really not expecting all that much. There isn't a lot of precipitable water really to deal with until you get to the end of next week, and even that is suppressed. And at most, you get a few scattered showers. That's pretty much it. You know, not looking for any major rainfall events. You get more of an influence from the Canadian Maritime. So these 850 millibar temperatures we're looking at, more of an influence from the Atlantic, and you peak out in the mid 80s in the Delaware River Valley, right around here. But nothing that's impressive in terms of heat. Yes, it's slightly above normal, but nothing that is historic or anything of that nature. The closer you are to the coast, the more likely you'll be in the 70s with that easterly wind. And take a look at the ensemble guidance here. It's pretty much in agreement with keeping that high pressure system just over or east of us, supporting that persistent easterly wind. There is that feature that beforehand was setting up as a low pressure system. Now it's more of a trough because you're getting a lot of conflicting data as to whether or not we're seeing any development. But let's just say we get a little weak low pressure system here and it produces a warm core system. Well, it's not going to get anywhere near us. It's going to just enhance the easterly wind flow. We'll watch out for a few pesky showers towards the middle and end of next week, but not anything significant. And then there's your cold front that marches through finally towards the end of the month with a few showers. But again, I don't see any major storms or anything of that nature. And in terms of the surface winds, it continues either from the northeast to southeast, but the general theme is east, easterly wind fetch through the next several days, which again is going to allow for your high tides to build up onto themselves. So as a result, each following high tide is a little bit higher. Combine that with the astronomical influences, and you can see my concern for coastal flooding in this scenario. Again, no strong winds here. We're not talking about 20-mile-per-hour winds unless you're well over into the ocean. We're talking about 5 to 15 miles per hour. So away from the coast, you'll barely notice the influence here. But if you're on the immediate coast, yeah, it's going to become a bit of an issue. So for today, high pressure and control, look for high temperatures in the upper 70s to lower 80s throughout the region. Tonight into tomorrow, again, some areas of fog in the morning, some low clouds, followed by clearing skies in the afternoon, lows in the upper 50s to lower 60s, highs in the lower to mid 80s throughout much of the region, mid to upper 80s around the Delaware River Valley and basically around the Philadelphia metro. For Sunday, high pressure in place with scattered cloud cover expected. Look for low temperatures in the upper 50s to lower 60s, high temperatures in the lower to mid 80s. On Monday, high pressure shifts a little bit further east. We get that easterly wind continuing. Again, fog in the morning, scattered clouds in the afternoon. Look for lows in the upper 50s to lower 60s, high temperatures in the upper 70s to lower 80s over the interior, lower to mid upper 70s to lower 80s along the coast, lower to mid 80s in the Delaware River Valley. Now for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and hey, you could even throw in Friday. You're going to continue on with this easterly fetch. Low pressure system is going to be meandering to the south, and it's going to produce this scattered cloud cover, unsettled conditions with a few isolated showers. Not really expecting much in the way of rainfall. You might pick up 1/10 of an inch through this forecast period. So if you're looking for like a rainfall event to help you with growing whatever you might be growing right now, like for example your lawn, get some lawn relief. Well, this isn't going to be that pattern. Scattered broken cloud cover, a few pesky showers. That's about it. Temperatures aren't going to be changing all that much either. Look for low temperatures in the upper 50s to lower 60s over the interior, lower to mid 60s in your suburbs, mid 60s to around 70 in your urban areas. High temperatures will range from the upper 70s to lower 80s along the coast, lower to mid 80s in the Delaware River Valley, and lower 80s over the interior. That is your forecast discussion for today. Have a wonderful day. And as always, stay safe out there.